the problem with prophecies of doom when it comes to the housing market is that not only is it kind of hyperbole, or often exaggerated, but I think it's downright dangerous. Hello and welcome to Money Talk with me, Russell Quirk, the show that tackles consumer finance issues that affect you on a day-to-day basis. Coming up, many expect house prices to continue to fall, but is a crash really on the cards? We've got everything you need to know about the big changes hitting the housing market and why amongst the doomsday predictions. I'm saying that now is a great time to buy. And joining me today is Tejvan Pettinger. Welcome. You're founder of the Economics Help website and someone who is firmly planted on the other side of my argument, I think. So welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
I'm an optimist. You're a bit of a pessimist. You've been forecasting, in fact you say on your website, I think, that you see that house prices have further to go in terms of fall. Why the pessimism and how far do you think that they are likely to drop?
Well, I'm definitely pessimistic because we've had 13 years of basically pretty close to zero interest rates. And in the recent months have increased quite dramatically. And so this has really changed the dynamic a lot.
In affordability terms, you mean?
In affordability terms, yes. Because we have house price to income ratios reaching 9 times average earnings, which is the highest level since the Victorian age.
Okay, but tell me this then. So we had the fateful quasi-quatrain budget in September where the wheels fell off the economy. Fixed rate mortgages went through the roof as a consequence of swap rates, gilt yields and so on escalating. Those rates, of course, have now started to come down again, quite significantly. That then was yet another call from the so-called experts, the same experts actually that talked about a housing market crash as a consequence of Brexit. So many experts were talking about that in 2015. Then we had the spectre of a no-deal Brexit, and of course, all of the experts, including the Bank of England and George Osborne at the time, the Chancellor, was saying that house prices would plummet. Then we had the pandemic, and of course, the same experts came out and said exactly the same thing again, house prices are going to plummet. We're now 6 months on from the fateful quasi-quatrain budget. House prices have only dropped by 3%. Where's the crash?
If we take Brexit and COVID, there was never going to be a crash then because interest rates were kept pretty close.
Experts were predicting it though.
Well, some might have done.
Not you?
Not me.
If I look back at your website, are you sure?
I promise you that I had a friend, beginning of COVID, wanting to buy a house. And he said, I'm going to wait for them to fall. And I said, that's a mistake. Get on the property ladder. Never hold back.
You'll be aware, of course, that this week we've seen numbers though from the Halifax, which actually even surprised me as the token optimist on the housing market, that house prices, according to the Halifax House Price Index, actually increased by 1.1% this month versus the previous month. What do you think about that?
Well, you shouldn't put too much emphasis on month-to-month
unless
statistics.
It suits.
Unless it suits. But there is a divergence between Halifax and the nationwide. Quite a big divergence.
Well, one's down 1% and one's up 1%. So should we call it an average and say it's flat and it's still not a crash?
Well, the actual house prices have fallen 5% since summer, according to the nationwide. You're referring to the annual house price inflation. And I think that over the coming months, that annual house price inflation will go further into negative territory. And the interesting thing about interest rates is that they usually say there's a time lag of between 6 months and 18 months to have an effect. It's why it makes monetary policy difficult.
But that didn't happen in the financial crisis. So in the financial crisis, as the screws started to tighten in terms of sentiment at the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, the wheels fell off the housing market pretty quickly. Didn't take 18 months. So there are a number of reasons why I remain a housing market optimist. First of all, mortgage rates that are fixed, so fixed rate mortgages, are now back to way below 4% and are at what I would consider to be a normal level, although of course the mainstream media perhaps are not quite reporting that as much as we would all like. 90% and 95% mortgages are still available, again, contrary to popular opinion. Employment rates, of course, remain high. Some 96% of people that are of economic working age are employed. And this, of course, normally is otherwise the first thing that weakens and then impacts the housing market. Inflation also has peaked. Energy prices to the consumer are dropping. Therefore, there is less pressure on interest rates. Britain, of course, also is a nation of aspirational homeowners. We're constantly told to buy a home because they are safe as houses and so on. So culturally, in my opinion, people will always prefer buying to renting, and that's a very strong imperative. There's also a massive shortage of housing stock, not enough homes built annually, something like a 100,000 unit deficit each and every year. So prices, in my opinion, have no reason to crash. They only do so if demand is much weaker than supply, and I simply don't think we're going to see that. It'd be fascinating to sit here perhaps in 12 months' time and see whether you were right or I was right. Maybe we should have a sporting bet for charity. 100 quid that I'm right and you're wrong.
And what is the bet?
The bet is that house prices will not be lower in 12 months' time than they are now. That's pretty good on your part, because you're saying they're going to drop 15%. I'm just saying they're not going to drop at all on a year-by-year basis. Will you have that bet with me?
Okay. And this is say nationwide house price index?
Whatever you like, nationwide. Okay. Yeah, nationwide. Good. So the outlook for UK property demand might not be as gloomy as some might be predicting, but where are some of the biggest housing hotspots in the UK? We took a look actually at the best and the worst, and I think this is very, very interesting indeed. So in fairness, I thought we should perhaps take a look at the best performing areas of the UK since the financial crisis that we talked about earlier, 2009. And there are some real winners here. So the likes of Waltham Forest has increased in value since 2009, would you believe, by 157%. In cash terms, that's £312,000. That if you're an owner of a home in Waltham Forest, you've done very, very well indeed in the last 14 years or so. The City of London is up 155%. Now, because the City of London starts off as a more expensive area in the first place, that cash equivalent is £588,000 as an increase in value since 2009. Hastings, so it's not just London here, Hastings up 140%, that's an increase of £173,000. Hackney up 135%. This is incredible numbers really. 368,000, and then Barking and Dagenham that started off at £154,000 back then in 2009, now £362,000. So a huge 134% increase. So some really, really big winners there. You could almost argue that if you lived in those areas, your house has earned more than you have over the last 14 years, and that's a pretty incredible stat, I think. Certainly something to think about. However, there are some losers, and I have to say, if you live in Scotland or Northern Ireland, look away now, because this isn't very pretty at all. The worst place to have bought a property in Britain since the financial crisis of 2009, I feel like we need a drum roll here really, is the city of Aberdeen. Aberdeen is the only place in Britain that has seen a reduction in house prices since the financial crisis of a whopping 12%. So if you live in Aberdeen and you own a home, your house in that period of time has dropped by 12%. Bearing in mind the national average actually is about 80% up. So the average house across Britain has increased in that time by about 80%. In Aberdeen, you're the only place that's gone down by 12%. That's an equivalent of £19,308. The reason I said if you're in Northern Ireland or Scotland, look away, is because there are a bunch of other places in the bottom five that have also not done so well. The likes of Ards and North Down has only risen 15%. By £27,000. Belfast and then Mid and East Antrim and then Inverclyde in Scotland are all losers, I'm afraid. Anyway, don't shoot the messenger, it's just what the data says. What do you think?
Well, it shows us that the housing market is very much a regional market, because what happens, say, in Oxford or London can be very different to what happens in the north. So when we talk about UK house prices, you have to bear in mind there's huge differences. And
well, there's no such thing as a property market. I mean, often people say to me, as they may do to you, what are house prices doing? You can't answer that anymore, because as we've just seen, it's incredibly fragmented.
Yeah, and the south of England and London, more vulnerable to house price falls just because they've had such a surge in the past 10 years, whereas some of the northern places have possibility for house price growth perhaps.
Now, shoppers have been grappling with the worst cost of living crisis in a generation, with many people turning away from premium supermarkets and switching to own branded products. So with this in mind, we're launching a basket league, which is to compare each week just how much a trolley full of 12 staple products will set you back at 5 of Britain's biggest and best known supermarkets. Then we'll let you know which is the cheapest and which is the most expensive. So let's digest this week's findings. How are you on supermarkets? What's your favourite supermarket?
Well, I do shop at Tesco, but my favourite is growing my own vegetables.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's got to be the cheapest way forward,
It's the cheapest way, and I could even get spinach and lettuce.
And probably the only way at the moment, given the crisis that there's been in terms of scarcity of stock, the only way you can actually find tomatoes and certain other staples anyway.
Yeah, not at this time of the year, but you can get a bit of spinach.
Yeah. Okay. So look, let's dig into this. So the researchers here have taken 12 items. So milk, so all the staples, milk, bread, baked beans, tomatoes, if you can get them, mince, butter, and so on. So there's 12 staples. Have added them up and then kind of dissected them on a supermarket basis. So we've looked at Aldi, Tesco, Asda, M&S and Sainsbury's. Do you want to have a guess which one's the cheapest?
I would guess Tesco.
Nope.
Sainsbury's.
Nope.
Aldi.
Yes. Aldi. So Aldi, but only just. So that basket of goods by Aldi comes out at a grand total of £18.22. Tesco actually is a very close second at £19.89, so fairly good value. Then Sainsbury's at £20.76. Asda, surprisingly, relatively expensive, I think, in the scheme of things, relatively, at £22.45. Marks and Spencer's the most expensive at £26.55. But actually only because of one item in the list, which is chicken. For some reason, Marks and Spencer's, they charge almost twice as much for a chicken as anybody else. Otherwise, they probably would have been up there with the likes of Aldi and Tesco. Who knew, huh? Maybe we'll do a taste test on the show in the future. So we'll keep this running week after week. I think it'll be very, very interesting to see what happens. I don't know what your take is on inflation, where inflation many think has peaked. As inflation starts to come down, of course, I don't suppose that means that these prices necessarily drop unless we end up with deflation.
No. We're definitely going to see a fall in the inflation rate, but that just means that prices will be increasing at a slower rate.
But they'll still go up.
They'll still be going up.
We've been asking you to tweet us with your questions relating to the debate over the housing market crash, so let's have a go at answering a few of them now. So first from Eric Water is, I've been saving up for a deposit for a while now and I'm close to the 5% that I need. But should I be looking to buy in the current climate, or is renting a better option for me right now? Well, I have to say, Eric, as I was talking about earlier on, if you had waited back in 2015 with all the doomsayers saying that house prices were going to drop, it would have cost you about £102,000. So I'm bound to say, don't wait, buy. Even though things are a little uncertain right now, and certain indexes are saying house prices are going up and some are saying going down. But one thing's for sure, we are not seeing, and in my opinion, not going to see a crash. Tejvan, you might have a slightly different take on that. Would you buy now? Would you encourage Eric to stay put or to buy?
Well, my actual philosophy is if you're renting, try to take any opportunities to buy, even if prices might fall.
I think I converted you, haven't I?
No, it's just that, like, I had an experience of a friend who kept waiting for prices to fall and got badly burnt.
There you go.
Because prices went up.
Well, house prices are up about 80% since the beginning of the century, so yes.
And I think that renting is dead money. You're paying an investment to your landlord. Buying a house, it's like going to be great when you get to retirement age.
You're definitely on my side now, aren't you?
No.
Okay, hopefully that's answered that. Question 2 is from Harry Thomas. He wants to know if moving from London to the north might be a good idea because obviously property prices are cheaper in the north. You're from the north, so you might be well qualified to answer this. So on the basis that house prices in London are about £550,000, obviously depending on where you go in the north, so County Durham I think is one of the cheapest places to buy, that you can still buy for under £100,000 in County Durham. It kind of makes sense, I suppose, doesn't it, that if you've built up equity in London and you were to sell that property and move to a cheaper area, you'll either end up with a lower mortgage and less payments or a slab of equity. I guess there is the small question though of logistics really in terms of whether you can actually work from home and deal with the distance that then provides. But what's your take?
I mean, it really depends on whether living in the north would work for you. If you get a nice place in the north.
I'm sure you'd recommend it though, wouldn't you, living in the north? as a Yorkshireman?
I was brought up in Bradford for 18 years and I now live in Oxford, so I'm kind of half and half, you could say. So I love going back home to Yorkshire, but I could do the same thing myself. I could sell up in Oxford and make £100,000, but for me, it's not worth that extra money.
And finally, our third question is, my fixed rate mortgage is up for renewal in September. Should I try and overpay as much as possible before then to bring down the interest payments? And also, should I go for another 5-year fixed rate deal? Well, what I would say is, on the basis that fixed rate costs are falling and have fallen significantly since the end of last year, I don't think when it comes to changing your mortgage in September that you're going to see a huge difference, because I think fixed rate mortgage costs have further to fall. So I wouldn't worry about overpaying, frankly, particularly if there's a penalty that may or may not apply to your particular mortgage product. Are you going to agree with me?
Well, I've got the same situation. I'm remortgaging this summer and I am trying to pay as much extra as I can because I think that's a good use of money at the moment, repaying a mortgage. When it comes to summer, I'll take a look, but I may well not want to fix for a long time. I may even get a variable mortgage because I actually think in the medium term, in the long term, interest rates will come down.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't be fixing now. I certainly wouldn't have fixed 3 or 4 months ago because, of course, fixed rates then were around 6 to 6.5%. My advice then certainly was to people, look, just wait, stick on a variable for a while. But I think that will change, I think, as the economic climate starts to improve, which I certainly believe it will. And that's it for today. A big thank you to Tejvan. Thank you very much indeed. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. I don't think we disagreed too vehemently, no punches thrown. And I think you came round to my way of thinking, if you're honest. Eventually. Anyway, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and we will be back next week for more Money Talk. See you then.